Let me now turn to Enni Kukka, and you. I don't know if you want to address this question through the notion of scaling, or through critiquing scaling, or maybe through something like cultural change, which may be more relevant in your case. How do you bring that about, and what are the challenges there?
Thank you, Tuukka, and thank you to the panel. It's been wonderful hearing your answers, and really, I wanted to sort of build on what's been said before. It's almost not a. I feel it's not a question of whether to scale or not, but really how the scaling takes place. What are the processes that are implemented, and why those are implemented as well. I would once again, thinking about the theme of today, but also the themes of all of our work, return back to nature, because who is better at scaling than nature itself? So again, how can we learn from how our other species, our other collaborators? I love what you said earlier, Samantha, about how we really need to think about our non-human colleagues, and I often talk about our non-human collaborators. How do they scale things in nature? Those are really the best examples I think we should be looking to, and a lot of that has to do with decentralized systems, localized systems, and really these networks of organisms that actually work together to scale things. So I think there are a lot of beautiful examples there that we can absolutely continue to learn from. But building on that and extending, as you said, Dorka, as well, thinking about it from a wider cultural perspective, I think at this point it's probably useful to quote the brilliant book Flourish that came out quite recently by Sarah Ichioka and Michael Paulin. And one of the things they talk a lot about is how we actually, instead of needing a technological shift or transformation to drive this necessary change, we actually need a cultural shift. We really need a wider transformation in our mindsets and in how we are able to comprehend and relate to these challenges. And that's really where I feel like my expertise comes in and where my work fits in. Ultimately, so much of what we're talking about now is really still an act of imagination. And this is something you talked a lot about in your address, Dorka, as well, this sense of imagining what could be. And I really feel like that's where creativity and a lot of the things that we're able to offer, our superpowers and our skill set comes in building different processes, creating spaces, building opportunities for us to start collectively imagining what could be. And this is ultimately, I feel, the most radical act of all, because we have to be able to imagine these alternative regenerative futures to then be able to realize them and act upon them. So this idea of how do we really shift our collective cultural mindsets is a huge challenge, but I feel such a huge opportunity. How do we stop focusing on a human-centered view of the world? And even in design and innovation, human-centeredness has been such a huge focus now for years, decades, which at the time was an important shift. But again, the time that we live in, that's no longer enough. We certainly need to move away from a human-centered perspective to a more planet-centered perspective. And going back to this question about scaling, maybe a useful way to tie this back up and refer to something both Delphina and Samantha talked about. When we think about scaling, all these processes currently are first and foremost sort of defined through the needs of global financial markets. And again, these systems that are very much man-made or human-created systems that then define the needs and the timelines and the outcomes of our processes. How do we again redefine these, not from a human-centered perspective, but from a planet-centered perspective, and really think about needs and wants beyond our own, which is what has got us to this position that we're in today in the first place. So I wholeheartedly agree with everything that the panel has said so far, but really encourage us to consider these radical acts of imagination that we desperately need to help us shift our mindsets.